Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I want to talk to you about being inspired, how to inspire yourself, and things to look for to maybe go to become more inspired about doing some things and maybe even interrupt whatever, and how I personally deal with trying to get inspired to do stuff. Before I do that, I want to remind people that I'm currently having a sale on lessons. So if people watching this video way into the future, this doesn't matter anymore because if you get the reservation in before the end of May, you pay only $40 an hour instead of the usual 90. It's going back up 90 when June rolls around. So if you want to get into this, go to seamlessr.com/wp/lessons, or go to the link in the description of this video, or go to seamlessr.com and click on the lessons button. It's right kind of there. It's sort of easy to find and stuff like that. Anyway, the video. So I wanted to talk about this before, but I just kind of kept forgetting about it. But then recently, some pretty relevant stuff occurred that like sort of made it kind of in the forefront for me. Mostly, it was I got some new modules. You might notice that the cube here is a little bit more full than it used to be, and it's because I have some new modules. Pretty much every single one up here is new, and then this guy's new. So it's all pretty great. And it's been extremely inspiring. The simplest things that I'm doing with it are new to me, and it's just really easy to get sucked in to do stuff that's like it's relevant to my interests and that kind of thing. Um, and this actually used to be entirely how I operated before. Before I knew what I know about. So this isn't that kind of thing. Back before I knew anything, everything was new and everything was cool. It was actually very easy to remain inspired. A lot of my older songs, entirely all they are is just experiments in a particular thing. Whole songs were just presets from synths and that kind of stuff. So I would always try to find new synths and new presets to be inspired, new samples, new techniques, especially when I learned about hardware resampling and that kind of thing. I crapped out a whole bunch of like my best shots of like neurodrum and bass at the time, that kind of thing, and then I learned FM synthesis, and suddenly that was bass antics and impulse gain and sometime and all that. Like that came out pretty immediately because it was all based around like those ideas. Those were like the most basic things, and I think that right there. If we deconstruct what happens, we can apply that to sort of intentional inspiration. Most of those older songs, especially like the ones that like sort of catapulted me to people's periphery, was like the bass antics and sometimes that kind of thing. And like those were they were easy to do for me, but not because they were easy ideas, but because I essentially just went for the first and simplest idea of the application of what I had just figured out in the time in that particular moment. It was FM, and like in fact in bass antics, the only hardware usage I have is presets. I'm using hardware presets that were in the factory hardware release because I didn't know how to use hardware back then. I knew how to do hardware resampling, but I didn't know anything about hardware synthesis, and that kind of thing. I changed a bit with some time, and like I also at the time started doing. I had been doing tutorials for a while. I did tutorials on basic ideas like how to make a super saw chord, how to layer that with a saw based kind of bass, and make that extremely common combination, which was news to me. This is all very new stuff, and like I was just doing it left and right, new songs all the time, and like, and it was all, and I had a goal in mind. I was trying to learn as much as I can about this kind of sound design. In the process, I was designing a lot of sounds that led immediately to like songs and that kind of thing. This happened less as time went on because as I learned more about what I wanted to do, I like just doing it like it's really kind of odd for me to be in a position where like I've reached where I want to go, and then now what do I do? What do I do with having been here? I always have to be going somewhere, and that's what honestly a big push about getting the analog stuff is that like I wanted to know what that was all about. So even if it is like I'm still rediscovering like seriously basic facets of synthesis, it's still inspiring enough for me to like do stuff with it and that kind of thing. So, and as well, but in the past, I would make a big point about how most plugins are gonna just be, like, especially like synth plugins, are mostly going to be doing the same thing. In fact, there's not a huge difference between them, and the differences are usually very low level technical stuff or just how they present what they're doing. So, like, and every synth will have their core kind of reason for existing, but compare stuff like Zeta or Silent or Anna, and that kind of thing, and they have very similar sort of features in terms of how they operate, and some subtle differences as well. But sort of a super saw is a super saw. It's a collection of saws, some voice detuning, and then reverb, and you're done. And every plugin on Earth can do that. So the differences between them technically may not be that amazing, but there's still differences. And the same thing with DAWs. Like, and getting a new piece of software, getting a new plugin, a new thing to interact with that you're not familiar with, even if it does stuff that you know what it's doing, the newness of it, and also just the different way it presents things to you is going to get you to do different things. Like, I also make a big deal about Harmor versus Razor, where Harmor, like, they're both the same basic idea of synthesis to both additive plugins, but Harmor is far more powerful. And I mean that in the sense that it can functionally do more than Razor can do. And in fact, it can do everything Razor can do. A couple of exceptions, like Razor has a sort of a vocoder mode where it'll just be a vocoder, essentially, however many bands it has, like 300 or something, and it'll just vocode them like it were an actual vocoder. But Harmor can't do that, but it can also do resampling, which, like, is that but better, but not live, obviously. Now, like, having said that, though, I did go look at Razor after I learned how. Once I figured out that there was the same thing, and I had already learned Harmor, I went to go to look at Razor, and I did all the modules I did all the stuff that I did, and a lot of it was stuff that it just wouldn't have occurred to me to do. Harmor absolutely could do that, but I was so ingrained in how I was used to using Harmor that it just wouldn't have occurred to me to try doing that. So, because it presented to me these ideas and these sort of routes and methods of doing things, it enhanced my understanding of sound design in that particular regard, and it also gave me new ideas to try stuff just in ways I just wouldn't have. Same deal with things like Serum. Serum is a little bit different because it's kind of like a fundamental, like, paradigm shift in an application of wavetable synthesis, because, like, wavetable synthesis has been around for kind of a long time, and it's also been very widely used, and it has been, like, not even just in, like, the digital realm, but in the digital realm, massive has been a thing for kind of a long time. And there's also been plugins that lets you make tables, lets you record tables, lets you manipulate tables, but not nearly to the degree that Serum does. So when Serum was new, that was a lot. Like, I spent a long time doing just making tables, just making sounds, and doing modulations and that kind of thing. And that all was there's a bunch of sketches actually I did that were, like, pretty great drops that were just based on stuff, like really basic stuff that Serum does. And I'm sure plenty of you have also noticed that lots of, like, larger releases from larger artists have things that are identifiably extremely simple things in Serum. Like, the reverb filter was popularized by its use in Serum almost immediately, even though the reverb filters and its filter types have existed in LFO tool for the whole time LFO tool's been around, I think. At least, before Serum was a thing. So it was around, but people weren't necessarily using it like that. But then, like, Serum comes around and now it's in everyone's face, and they all just put a saw wave in the reverb filter, and then that's a lead. That's been a lead in a lot of stuff. It's like that's and also, like, the phaser modes and the band passing and that kind of thing, like in the high pass modes and whatever. Like, a lot of like early adopters will use extremely basic applications of unknown or new things as like a intentional method of creating uniqueness, but also because when you're messing around with something brand new, that's the stuff you do. You do the surface stuff, you do the obvious things, and it's all still just new to you. It's all, pretty great. And even, like, I mentioned a super saw, the whole collection of saws, and, some reverb and the stand of that. Like, even though most, like, this, it honestly feels very unimpressive when I explain kind of what all the individual elements do, and especially for how much they cost, because I want to point out that, like, the new modules I got total to around $1,600, and, like, that's expensive inspiration. I don't necessarily recommend that you do that, and if I wasn't, like, making enough money to comfortably live on doing all this stuff, thanks to you guys, by the way, I would not ever recommend doing this, just because pure function wise, digital will always be better than analog in that particular regard. Of course, analog will always have its thing that is kind of ephemerally inaccessible in particular digital ways. At least for now, a lot of the things that analog has been known to do and only be able to do has been kind of done by digital as time has passed. So I'm sure in 10 more years that will be less and less of a thing. And then, of course, it's also just like a whole different form factor concept. The idea of, like, having to use actual knobs and patch cables will definitely make you do stuff that you would not have thought to do with just sort of regular voice construction inside a normal plugin inside a DAW. And, like, that's not just in, like, learning stuff, because that's also an important thing to do when you're learning things, especially when you're new. Experimenting with every possible thing you can possibly get your hands on from every angle you can imagine. That's, like, great for learning, but it's also great for, like, putting yourself in a different perspective to allow something to come up in a way that wouldn't have otherwise, because especially if you get used in a rut. You get in a rut and then like you're used to doing things a certain way, and then there's not really a reason, and unless you like expose yourself to outside influences, like new plugins, listen to new music, new equipment, that kind of thing, newness, you're not ever going to get out of your rut, because it's just honestly, it's probably like psychologically impossible to do that without external stimuli. That's kind of another thing to do, is listen to music. It's sort of unfortunate as a producer, especially because I spend all my time doing it. Like, I have the unimaginable luck and fortune of being able to do this all day, which means that like I don't commute to work. I don't like. I'm usually working on music, which means I don't have actually a lot of time to listen to music. I'm not like a visual artist who can draw like while I'm drawing, listen to music, or while I'm writing, listen to music, or while I'm driving to work, listen to music. All of my free time is working on music, and I can't work on music and listen to music. It's you know, they can't do the two different things. So I have to like make time to like stop and listen to music, or like find really good excuses for like when I am traveling. It's kind of like, great, a whole bunch of hours in the airplane, I can listen to a crap ton of music. Let's go to Spotify, download everything. Like that's sort of that idea. And then like motivation. I want to point out that like a lot of things I'm talking about can be construed as this idea of like creating motivation, but motivation and inspiration are not the same thing. You can be inspired to be motivated, and you can be motivated to find inspiration, but they are somewhat different. Inspiration is something that's not really under your control, and motivation is something that you can absolutely influence. And it's a little bit difficult to talk about both, but really what I'm trying to explain here is methods to allow you to kind of have yourself be open to inspiration, to put yourself into situations where inspiration is more likely to occur. Doing the stuff you've always been doing and searching in no way for anything new or interesting is a good way to never be inspired. But then like seeking out new ideas, new inspirations, new perspectives and that kind of stuff, even on simple stuff. Like you do things in the way that you've never done before, and it's pretty easy to do that with FL, because there's so many ways of doing anything. Even the ways that I'm used to doing are not. I've seen like in lessons, people will do even the simplest stuff in different ways, and like when I went to BT's place that first time, they were describing because E5 Freckle there too, but they were all describing because how like the week before Savant was down there, and like the way that he like used FL as a program was just so very different from sort of typical use, and just like watching him do stuff gave them ideas about stuff they wouldn't have thought to do in ways that they didn't, you know, just A, didn't know they could do that, and B, didn't think they could do it in the way that it was done. So that's fuel right there for you to be like, oh, I could do all this stuff now. Oh, there's so many options. And that's kind of what I got. Like even the simple stuff, like the reverb unit they got, the herb verb from Make Noise. It's like it's a digital reverb, because if you didn't know this about sort of analog stuff, is that analog reverb comes in like extraordinarily limited flavors. You've got spring reverbs, which require like an actual like spring to run it through, and then stuff like plate reverb, which is not a module. That's a thing. That's a put a microphone in front of a plate and then have it go around the other side and then come back. It's actually really cool physics wise, but like in terms of like a package, a tiny thing, any kind of reverb device like that is digital, and so this is digital processing, right? So it's sort of like it's not analog anymore. So what about that works? And there's obviously some blurring of lines about like what parts of it are analog, what parts of it are digital, because it can accept analog signals and interpret that as control change, and it does so in real time, and it does so at audio rate, which is something that like general purpose DAWs and like processing and computers have problem doing, but dedicated units can do stuff that our typical understanding of the limitations of digital really don't run into. And anyway, so like stuff that you would never have thought to do before, like the room size of a reverb, FMing the room size of a reverb. What does that do? Like, and like just like that most basic idea, I mess around with it. I got so many cool sounds. And the special part, and I realized this when the first time I ever touched any of this analog stuff, when I went to Cellular's place, I was surprised at the sounds that I got, not because they were not anything I ever heard before, or even sounds that I thought that I couldn't do without this. It's just that while I could arrive at that without doing it the way that I did it with analog, it was different. It would have been a different set of things to accomplish that digitally, and oftentimes it would have been harder. Like, it's a lot of these sounds are cool and possible to do digital, but it's just a lot harder, and or like a wildly different idea about how certain things can work. Like some of the processes of like having not the room size, but other kinds of pieces in the reverb unit, like sounded a little bit like what happens when I use a phaser in particular ways. So like, you know, that could happen. But like, even if I knew, even after hearing it, I knew how I could do it digitally. It wouldn't have occurred to me to do that digitally to arrive at that particular sound. So like, that's the value of sort of exposing yourself to sort of new interfaces and new form factors and new techniques, new types of stuff or whatever. It's all very pretty good. And you know, I've experienced an interesting transition having done this long enough that I definitely remember what it was like to be a noob, and a lot of what I feel like is my best work, with a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, my best work has always been things that I didn't really know what I was doing while I was doing it, or that I was very, very limited in my knowledge or my application, that like I had to work within particular constraints. And then as the years grew on, like there have been a couple points where I had everything I ever wanted to do, whatever I ever wanted, and then actually like doing something with that was really hard, because when there's no constraints, you're ultimately responsible for everything that you're doing, and it's hard to make a decision when you could do literally anything else at any given time for anything. Versus if you're limiting yourself to only using analog stuff, then like you have to force yourself to work within the boundaries and creative ways that makes you do stuff you wouldn't have thought to do otherwise. You know, that's the important takeaway from that. I feel like I rambled on for kind of a long time and have been repeating myself, so I'm going to stop. But if you have any questions about any of this, I hope any of that helped. I really hope some of that helped. Please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget about this the lesson sale that's happening till the end of May. If you schedule a lesson before the end of May, which is to say that you get your reservation in before the end of May, you can schedule it for September, as far as you want, actually. Then you get the $40 an hour price, and then when June comes back around, it will be back up to $90. Questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and as usual, have a nice day. Yes.